More than 2,000 years ago in ancient Greece, a blind poet known as Homer, along with the most celebrated authors, playwrights, and historians of his time, recorded the tales we know as Greek mythology. They spoke of the earth's great heroes, the mighty gods of Olympus, and mortal men and women who, unfortunately, crossed their paths. But who was Zeus, and why did he wage war against his own father? And why did he send a great flood to destroy mankind? How was humanity created by Prometheus? And why were the world's horrors unleashed from Pandora's box? What awaited the souls of the dead in the realm of Hades? And how were monsters like the Hydra, Cyclops, and Medusa defeated by famous heroes? From the 12 Labors of Hercules to the Trojan War, this is the complete story of Greek mythology. In the beginning, there was only chaos, a great void. But from chaos emerged Gaia, the earth, and also Eros, love. Then came night and day, who put an end to the reign of Erebus, darkness, establishing an eternal cycle of twilight and dawn. Finally, there was Tartarus, the deepest depths of the world, where condemned souls were sent for punishment. But these were not the only primordial beings, for Gaia bore yet another, Uranus, the sky. They joined together and produced 12 children, 6 sons and 6 daughters. These children became known as the Titans. Among them was Oceanus, the great river that surrounded the world. He was joined by his brother, Hyperion, the sun, who rode his great chariot across the sky, bathing the earth in light. But as day turned to night, his daughter Selene, the moon, appeared, shining her own light in the darkness. Uranus, however, was a cruel father to the Titans, imprisoning his children deep within the earth. To break free, they turned to their mother Gaia, who crafted an indestructible sickle and gave it to her youngest and strongest son, Cronus. Cronus waited patiently, and when Uranus next came to Gaia, he leaped out and severed his father's genitals, which fell into the sea. From these was born Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, the first of a new generation. Having defeated his father Uranus with the sickle, Cronus took his place as ruler of the world, but his reign was not to last. Cronus and his sister Rhea bore 3 sons and 3 daughters who became known as the gods. Cronus, however, was as cruel as his father, and upon learning that one of his children would, according to prophecy, overthrow him, he swallowed each of them whole soon after birth. Only one escaped this terrible fate. Zeus, the youngest of the children, was saved by his mother Rhea. Unwilling to lose her last child, Rhea hid Zeus on Mount Ida in Crete, and instead substituted a stone dressed in baby clothes for her husband, which Cronus swallowed unknowingly. Zeus was raised by his grandmother Gaia on a hidden island until he reached maturity and was strong enough to challenge his father. When the time came, Zeus returned, overthrew Cronus, and freed his brothers and sisters from his stomach. Along with his siblings, Zeus waged war against the Titans for 10 long years, freeing from the depths of the earth the 100-handed giants and the Cyclopes, legendary craftsmen who forged for Zeus the mighty thunderbolt, for Poseidon the trident, and for Hades the cap of invisibility, which turned the tide of the war. The defeated Titans were imprisoned by Zeus in Tartarus, in the depths of the earth, where they remained in eternal torment. For Atlas, who led the Titans in battle, a special punishment was prepared. He was cursed to forever hold the sky upon his shoulders. Only a few Titans escaped punishment. Themis, Titan of law and order, and her son Prometheus, who had sided with Zeus at the beginning of the conflict, were pardoned and allowed to live among the gods. Having freed the world from the rule of the Titans, the 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, decided which realm would befall each. Zeus received the heavens, Poseidon the seas, and Hades the underworld, where the spirits of the dead dwelled. Settling on Mount Olympus, Zeus and his fellow gods became known as the 12 Olympians, ruling over mortals and monsters. Though the gods now ruled the earth, Prometheus, one of the few surviving Titans, was unhappy with its inhabitants. He saw only beasts, mindless creatures, barely worthy of consideration. So Prometheus sculpted man from clay, creating him in the image of the gods. But Prometheus was not satisfied with his creation, for man lived in caves, like other beasts. He then gifted them fire, the great primordial flame, which allowed them to leave the caves, create tools, and rise from the darkness. Soon man came to dominate all other creatures, but Zeus was displeased. He wanted man to show gratitude to the gods and demanded that at every meal, an animal be sacrificed. leaving it to Prometheus to decide which part of the animal would be offered to the gods. Prometheus, however, was loyal to man, not the gods. Wishing to give man an advantage, he slaughtered a bull and divided it into 2 parts, presenting them to Zeus. On one side lay the tender and succulent meat, hidden beneath the animal's unappealing stomach. On the other side were bare bones, covered in a thick layer of appetizing fat. Zeus chose the part covered in fat for the god's sacrifices, but upon removing the top layer, he found only bones and became enraged. As punishment, he snatched fire away from man, which Prometheus had gifted them. Without fire, man returned to darkness, taking refuge in caves. Wishing to save his creation, Prometheus ascended Mount Olympus and stole the god's fire. With a great torch in hand, he returned to Earth, once again bestowing fire upon man and allowing civilization to be reborn. When Zeus saw fire on Earth once more, he became enraged, chaining Prometheus to a rock on the mountain. Every day Prometheus suffered torment, as Zeus sent an eagle to peck at his liver. But being immortal, every night Prometheus's liver regenerated, only to be eaten again the following day. This punishment lasted for millennia. But Zeus did not stop there, and decided to punish mankind even more severely, ordering Hephaestus to create a being capable of bringing great suffering to man. Hephaestus sculpted the first woman from clay. From Aphrodite, she received emotions and beauty. From Zeus, insatiable curiosity. And from Hermes, the gift of speech, and the name Pandora, meaning all gifted, for she received a gift from each of the gods. Pandora was handed a sealed box, which she was told contained special gifts, but she was forbidden to open it. Zeus entrusted Hermes to deliver Pandora to Earth, where she soon married the Titan Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother. Prometheus had warned his brother not to accept gifts from the gods, but blinded by Pandora's beauty, Epimetheus accepted her without hesitation. For a time they lived happily, exploring nature and raising a daughter named Pyrrha, who brought them great joy. But Pandora's curiosity would not leave her at peace, and her thoughts constantly returned to the box. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and her curiosity became unbearable. Finally, unable to resist any longer, she opened the box a crack to peer inside. At that moment, a dark cloud burst forth from the box. Out flew all the woes that Prometheus had protected mankind from: greed, envy, old age, and disease. All of them flew into the world. When Pandora managed to close the lid, only one thing remained inside: hope. This was Zeus's greatest punishment, for with hope, man clung to life despite all hardships, condemning themselves to suffering until the end of time. Thus ended the golden age of man, a perfect time when humans lived without cares or worries. Without aging, they feasted on the wild fruits of the earth, enjoying all that nature provided. But with old age released from Pandora's box, their time on earth came to an end. Then came the Silver Age, followed by the Bronze Age, when men became arrogant, ceased to honor the gods, and began forging weapons for war against each other. Cruel and malevolent, they incurred the wrath of Zeus, who, appalled by their thirst for war, decided mankind deserved nothing but complete annihilation. The only way he saw was to send a great flood upon the world. He asked his brother Poseidon to gather all his might and strike the deepest depths of the ocean with his trident. The wave created was so great that it dwarfed the highest mountains, crashing down upon the cities of men below. Rain poured from the heavens, and winds battered the waters until everything in sight was engulfed. Survivors soon died of hunger until finally, all land disappeared. Only 2 survived: Pyrrha, Pandora's daughter, and Deucalion, Prometheus's son. Prometheus had warned them of the coming flood, and they had built a ship to survive the destruction. Their small boat weathered the fury of Poseidon's great storm, drifting alone on the endless oceans as they mourned their fallen kin. Soon, they landed upon Mount Parnassus, its peak remaining the only land not submerged by the ocean. Believing his work complete, Zeus commanded the rains to cease and the waters to recede, and the earth became peaceful once more. But though the earth was now quiet, it was devoid of human life. Deucalion and Pyrrha appealed to the gods to ask how mankind could be reborn. The Titan Themis was sent to answer their prayers. To bring back man, she instructed them to walk upon the mountain, casting stones behind their backs. Day after day, and night after night, they cast stones, and those that Deucalion threw turned into men, and those that Pyrrha threw turned into women. Thus mankind was born anew. The sins of their ancestors were washed away, and they were given a second chance to choose their own path. Only time would tell if they would be as cruel and destructive as those who came before them. But this time, mankind was protected. For upon Mount Parnassus, Deucalion found a gift, a tool so reliable that even the gods of Olympus could not overcome it. Zeus, king of the gods, ruled from his throne on Mount Olympus, and his symbols, the thunderbolt and the eagle, became omens for mankind. Zeus was responsible for all changes in weather, from thunderstorms to violent blizzards, depending on his mood. The Greeks considered Zeus the greatest of the gods. Those who worshipped him received good fortune, while those who dared to disobey him suffered terrible punishments. Taking control of the world, Zeus began to seek a wife to rule alongside him. However, the king of the gods was known for his infidelity, and during his reign, he had no less than 7 wives. Zeus's first wife was the nymph Metis, goddess of wisdom, who soon became pregnant with his child. But Zeus had been prophesied by his grandmother Gaia and grandfather Uranus that Metis would give birth to a cunning son who would one day take his throne. Seeing no other option, Zeus swallowed Metis before she could give birth, hoping to avert the prophecy. However, after this, Zeus began to suffer severe headaches that grew stronger until he asked for his head to be split open with an axe. From the wound on his forehead emerged a daughter, whom Metis had carried within her. Athena, goddess of war and wisdom, fully grown and ready to take her place among the Olympians. Zeus's second wife was his aunt Themis, titan of justice and law, who betrayed her own kind to side with the gods during the war against the Titans. They bore only 3 daughters, but these daughters gained great power over the mortal world. They became known as the 3 Fates, goddesses of destiny, who spun the thread of life, determining the path of each soul. The youngest sister, Clotho, known as the Spinner, was responsible for spinning the thread of life for each person at their birth. Her elder sister, Lachesis, the Allotter, determined each person's fate by measuring the length and character of the thread with her staff, thus setting the duration and major events of a life. The eldest and most fearsome sister, Atropos, the Inevitable, cut the thread with her scissors when it was time for a person to die. Zeus continued to take other goddesses as wives, fathering many gods and goddesses, but it was with his elder sister, Hera, goddess of women and marriage, that Zeus found a queen to rule alongside him. But even after marriage, Zeus's lustful gaze roamed beyond the heavens, and Zeus continued to pursue other women. He fathered countless children, being connected with almost every god and hero. Often Zeus would disguise himself to win the affections of the women who caught his attention. One such woman was Europa, princess of the city of Tyre, and sister of the renowned hero Cadmus. One day, while gathering flowers by the shore, Europa caught Zeus's eye, and he decided to claim her for himself. To hide his infidelity from Hera, Zeus transformed into a magnificent white bull and descended to earth. Seeing the bull, Europa was captivated by its beauty and decided to climb onto its back. As soon as she did, Zeus plunged into the sea. In terror, Europa clung to the bull's horns as it galloped across the vast ocean. To calm the frightened princess, Zeus revealed his true nature, announcing that he was not merely a beast but the king of the gods. They arrived in Crete, the island where Zeus had hidden as a child, and there Europa bore him many children. Their descendants became some of Greece's most famous figures, including Minos, king of Crete and owner of the legendary Minotaur. In honor of his love for Europa, Zeus named the continent on which they stood Europe and created the image of the white bull in the stars, which became the constellation Taurus. Hera, Zeus's wife and queen of the gods, was the patron of marriage and women, deeply revered in Greek society. However, she was one of the most vengeful and malicious goddesses on Olympus, making her an ill-suited match for Zeus, whose numerous infidelities constantly fueled her wrath. Despite her status as queen, Hera bore Zeus only 2 of the 12 Olympians, Ares and Hephaestus, while other gods were born from his many lovers. One of Zeus's most insulting infidelities was his affair with the princess Io, one of Hera's most devoted priestesses. When Hera came to investigate, Zeus, to protect Io, transformed her into a beautiful white cow. But the queen of the gods was not fooled, and knowing she had caught Zeus red-handed, demanded the cow as a gift. Zeus, knowing that refusal would confirm Hera's suspicions, was forced to agree. Hera imprisoned Io in a cave, where she was guarded by the 100-eyed monster Argus, the perfect guardian who could sleep with half his eyes while leaving the other half awake. Zeus, too fearful of Hera to intervene himself, sent the messenger god Hermes to free the unfortunate Io. Hermes, a master of music, decided to defeat Argus not by force but by cunning. Approaching the monster as a friend, he began to play his flute and sing lullabies until Argus fell asleep. As the last eye closed, Hermes drew his sword and slew the beast, freeing her from captivity. In gratitude for his service, Hera took Argus's eyes and placed them on the tail of the peacock, her favorite animal, which became a symbol of her power. But Hera did not stop there and sent a gadfly to torment Io during her escape, nearly driving her mad. Io wandered for a long time, and the sea along which she fled was named the Ionian Sea in her honor. The Bosphorus, meaning Cow's Ford, also received its name in memory of her wanderings. Eventually, Io reached the Nile in Egypt. Far from Hera, where Zeus was able to restore her human form, they bore a son, Epaphus, and Io became the ancestor of many of Greece's great heroes, including Perseus and Hercules. Another of Zeus's mistresses, who experienced the full force of Hera's wrath, was Leto. Upon learning that Leto was pregnant with Zeus's twins, Hera sent the great serpent Python to pursue her, forcing Leto to flee across Greece in search of refuge to give birth to her children. But Hera forbade any city to offer her sanctuary, and Leto wandered from Athens to Crete, from Lemnos to Samos. But no one dared to take her in for fear of the queen of the gods' wrath. Only the island of Delos agreed to shelter Leto, but she was still unable to give birth, as Hera kept Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, on Olympus, preventing any labor. After 9 days and nights of agonizing labor, the other goddesses took pity on Leto and freed Eileithyia from Olympus, and Leto was able to give birth. She named the children Apollo and Artemis, god of archery and goddess of the hunt, who grew to become full gods of Olympus. After the birth of the twins, cities and settlements across the known world held great celebrations in their honor. Of these, the city of Thebes organized the most lavish festivities. However, one resident of Thebes, Queen Niobe, did not participate in the celebrations. Her beauty was matched only by her arrogance. Boasting to anyone who would listen, Niobe mocked Leto, claiming that since she herself had 7 sons and 7 daughters, and Leto only 2 children, it was she, Niobe, who deserved the honors. Upon hearing this insult, Leto became enraged that a mortal queen dared to humiliate her, and sent Apollo and Artemis to Thebes. Arrows rained down from above. Apollo killed all of Niobe's sons, and Artemis all of her daughters, leaving the queen alone and in despair. Devastated by the loss of her children, Niobe fled to her homeland of Sipylus, weeping incessantly and praying to the gods to end her suffering. Taking pity on the queen, Zeus transformed her into a huge rock, permanently ending her torment. Located in western Turkey and known as the Weeping Rock, this stone of Niobe can still be seen weeping during the rain, as water seeps through the porous rock. Apollo, the younger of the twins, was the god of archery, light, and music. He was also closely associated with prophecy. Apollo traveled to Mount Parnassus, home of the serpent Python who had persecuted his mother. In revenge, he slew the monster with many shots from his golden bow and built a great temple on the spot where the serpent's body fell. This temple became the home of the famous Oracle of Delphi. Known as the Pythia, the oracle became one of the most influential figures in ancient Greece. Sought out for advice by everyone from great kings to simple farmers, she was believed to be the mouthpiece of Apollo. Inhaling vapors rising from her chambers, she would fall into a trance, delivering the god's prophecy through her mad and frantic chants. After his great victory over Python, whom Apollo killed with more than 1,000 arrows, he was filled with pride, proclaiming himself the greatest archer of all time. His arrogance grew to such an extent that upon seeing the young god of love, Eros, with a bow and arrows, Apollo laughed at him, declaring that he was not worthy to even hold such a weapon. Enraged by the mockery, Eros swore revenge upon Apollo, promising to show him the true power of his bow. Following Apollo to the Peneus River, Eros soon noticed the river's daughter, the beautiful Daphne, sitting by the bank. Taking aim, he shot Apollo with a golden arrow, causing him to fall madly in love with Daphne. But into Daphne herself, he shot an arrow tipped with lead, causing her to feel only disgust at the sight of Apollo. As the god of archery approached Daphne, consumed by passion, she fled from him in terror, racing through the forest in a desperate attempt to escape. Consumed by Eros's spell and eager to confess his love, Apollo pursued her, using his divine powers to quickly catch up. In fear of the god, Daphne cried out to her father, the river god Peneus, for help. He answered her call, and soon Daphne felt a heaviness envelop her limbs. Slowing down, her skin turned to bark, and her hair to leaves, until finally, the transformation was complete. Where a young and beautiful woman had stood only moments before, there now grew the first laurel tree. Apollo, using his powers of eternal youth, made the laurel leaves evergreen, so they would retain their color all year round. Mourning his lost love, Apollo always wore a laurel wreath so that Daphne would remain close to his heart. Apollo's most important child was Asclepius, a renowned physician so skilled that he could bring the dead back to life. This, however, incurred the wrath of Hades, for such resurrections disrupted the balance of nature and robbed the underworld of new souls. To restore order, Zeus killed Asclepius with a thunderbolt, but at Apollo's plea, he resurrected him later. And Asclepius became the god of healing and medicine. Asclepius later became the father of Hygeia, the goddess of cleanliness, from whom the word hygiene is derived. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt and Apollo's twin sister, was a deadly archer who watched over hunters and maintained the balance of nature. As the goddess of the moon and one of the three virgin goddesses alongside Athena and Hestia, Artemis was quick to anger, protecting her chastity by any means necessary. When the hunter Actaeon, grandson of Cadmus, stumbled upon her bathing in the woods, the goddess immediately punished him. Transforming Actaeon into a deer, she set his own 50 hunting dogs upon him, and the hunter met a gruesome death for his mistake. Poseidon, Zeus's brother, ruled the seas from his magnificent palace beneath the waves. Known as the Earth-Shaker, Poseidon caused all earthquakes. He traveled the oceans in his golden chariot and controlled the waters with his famous trident. One of his harshest punishments was inflicted upon Minos, king of Crete. When Minos refused to sacrifice his finest bull to Poseidon, the god cursed Minos's wife, causing her to fall in love with the beast, leading to the birth of the half-bull, half-man known as the Minotaur. Though Poseidon usually remained in his watery domain, he grew tired of Zeus's rule on Olympus. Along with Athena, Hercules, and Apollo, he attempted to overthrow Zeus, but the rebellion failed. As punishment, Zeus sent Poseidon and Apollo to serve King Tros of Troy, where they spent a year building the city's famous walls, which would later withstand the onslaught of Greece's greatest armies during the Trojan War. Athena, goddess of war and wisdom, daughter of Zeus and Metis, was known for her love of strategists and cunning heroes, aiding many of them in their great feats. But she was also a proud goddess, and to claim dominion over a city, she decided to contend for patronage over a great city in eastern Greece that had yet to be named. Competing with her uncle Poseidon, they were to gift the city the best gift. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, and a spring of water gushed forth, but the water was salty and unfit for cultivation, which did not impress the city's inhabitants. Athena, however, wishing to gift the city something unprecedented, touched the ground with her palm, and the first olive tree grew forth. It not only fed the people but also had countless uses. Its oil was used in cooking, medicine, perfumery, for lamps, and in athletics, bringing immense benefits to the ancient world. Poseidon, bowing his head in shame, admitted defeat, and the gods declared Athena the victor. The city was named after her and became known as Athens, the capital of Greece and one of the most important cities of its time. Athena, the inventor of mathematics, also loved music, creating the trumpet and the flute, and was a patron of artists and craftsmen. She was particularly proud of her weaving skills, but this led to a conflict with a young woman from Libya named Arachne, a skilled weaver herself. Arachne boasted that she was the greatest in the craft and challenged Athena to a competition. They were to create tapestries depicting the gods, and the winner would be she whose work proved superior. They wove for hours until finally, both tapestries were completed. To Athena's surprise, Arachne's work proved far superior. In a rage, Athena struck the girl on the head until she fell to the floor, but instead of killing her, Athena transformed Arachne into the first spider, so she could use her talents to weave beautiful webs. From her name came the name for arachnids, Arachnida. Hades, brother of Zeus and Poseidon, ruled the underworld, the realm of the dead, where souls were sent after death. He was called the Unseen, for he rarely left his realm, and his presence inspired fear. With the aid of his cap of invisibility, forged by the Cyclops, Hades could move about unnoticed. His realm, located deep beneath the earth, was a dark and grim place, guarded by the three-headed dog Cerberus, who prevented souls from escaping. The underworld was divided into three regions: the Asphodel Meadows, where ordinary souls wandered; Elysium, a paradise for the righteous; and Tartarus, a place of eternal torment for the most wicked souls, such as the Titans. Hades was a stern but just ruler, ensuring that souls received what they deserved. However, he was lonely and sought a wife to rule alongside him. His choice fell upon Persephone, daughter of Zeus and Demeter, the goddess of agriculture. Zeus agreed to the marriage, but knowing Demeter would never allow her daughter to go to the underworld, Hades decided to kidnap Persephone. One day, as she was gathering flowers, the earth opened up, and Hades whisked her away in his chariot to his realm. Demeter, distraught with grief, searched the world for her daughter, but no one dared tell the truth for fear of Hades. In despair, Demeter refused to perform her duties as goddess of agriculture, and the earth began to die. Fields dried up, crops perished, and mankind starved. Zeus, in the form of destruction, summoned Demeter to Olympus and revealed that Persephone was with Hades. He sent Hermes to the underworld with orders to release Persephone. However, before leaving, Hades cunningly persuaded Persephone to eat 6 pomegranate seeds, which bound her to the underworld. Because of this, she had to spend half the year, 6 months, with Hades, and the other half with her mother on earth. This is why the Greeks believed that 6 months of the year brought fertility, when Persephone was with Demeter, and the other 6 months brought barrenness and cold, when she was in the underworld. Thus, the seasons were born. Hermes, god of trade, thievery, and messenger of the gods, was known for his cunning and speed. With winged sandals and helmet, he could travel instantly between worlds. Hermes was the patron of travelers, merchants, and thieves, but he also accompanied the souls of the deceased to the underworld, for which he was called a psychopomp, or guide of souls. His inventions, such as the lyre, made him a favorite of the gods, and his ability to lull Argus to sleep proved his mastery of cunning. Dionysus, god of wine, revelry, and madness, was the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Semele. Hera, in her usual wrath, tricked Semele into demanding Zeus appear in his full divine glory. Unable to refuse, Zeus appeared before her in a blaze of lightning, and Semele was consumed in his light. Zeus saved their unborn son by sewing him into his thigh, from which Dionysus was later born. Raised by nymphs, Dionysus invented wine and became the god whose festivals at the Bacchanalia were filled with wild revelry and ecstasy. His followers, the Maenads, were known for their frenzied dancing, and Dionysus himself could drive those who rejected his cult to madness. One day, King Midas did Dionysus a favor by returning his drunken tutor, Silenus. In reward, Dionysus offered to grant Midas any wish. The king wished that everything he touched would turn into gold. At first, Midas rejoiced, turning stones and trees into gold, but soon realized he could not touch food, water, or even his daughter without turning them into metal. In despair, he begged Dionysus to remove the gift. The god told him to wash himself in the river Pactolus, and the curse was lifted, and the river has carried golden sand ever since. Hephaestus, son of Zeus and Hera, was the god of blacksmiths and fire. Born weak and lame, he was cast from Olympus by Hera, but survived, falling into the sea, where he was rescued by sea nymphs. Hephaestus became the greatest blacksmith, crafting weapons and armor for the gods, including Zeus's thunderbolts and Poseidon's trident. To return to Olympus, he forged a magnificent throne for Hera, but when she sat upon it, the throne trapped her. Only after the persuasion of the other gods did Hephaestus free his mother and was accepted back on Olympus. Zeus gave Hephaestus in marriage Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, but their marriage was unhappy. Aphrodite, born from sea foam after Uranus's genitals fell into the sea, was the embodiment of passion but often cheated on Hephaestus, especially with Ares, the god of war. Upon discovering their affair, Hephaestus created a magical net of the finest metal and caught the lovers in bed, exposing them to ridicule by the other gods. Despite this, Aphrodite remained with Hephaestus, but continued her affairs, bearing children such as Eros, the god of love. Aphrodite also played a key role in the fate of mortals. When Paris, prince of Troy, was chosen to judge which of 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, or Aphrodite, was most beautiful, he gave the golden apple to Aphrodite, seduced by her promise to gift him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen. This decision led to Helen's abduction by Paris and the beginning of the Trojan War, one of the greatest conflicts in Greek mythology. Greek mythology not only celebrates the gods but also the heroes, mortals or demigods who performed great deeds. One of the greatest was Hercules, son of Zeus, and the mortal woman Alcmena. His birth incurred Hera's wrath, who vowed to make his life unbearable. To deceive Hera, Alcmena hid Hercules, but the goddess still found him and sent 2 snakes to the infant. However, even as an infant, Hercules proved extraordinarily strong. He strangled the snakes with his bare hands. As Hercules grew, Hera inflicted him with madness, causing him to commit the horrific crime of killing his wife and children. As atonement, King Eurystheus, instigated by Hera, assigned Hercules 12 labors, each seemingly impossible. The first labor was to slay the Nemean lion, whose hide was impervious to weapons. Hercules strangled the beast and wore its skin as armor. The second labor was to destroy the Lernaean Hydra, a monster with 9 heads, one of which was immortal. Hercules chopped off the heads, while his nephew Iolaus coughed the necks to prevent them from growing back, until the last head was buried beneath a stone. The third labor was to capture the Ceryneian hind, a sacred animal of Artemis, which Hercules pursued for a full year before capturing it alive. The fourth labor was to capture the Erymanthian boar, a massive beast ravaging the land. Hercules drove it into deep snow and bound it. The fifth labor was to clean the Augean stables, which had not been cleaned for years. Hercules diverted the course of 2 rivers to wash away the filth in a single day. The sixth labor was to drive away the Stymphalian birds, which devoured crops. Athena gave Hercules bronze rattles to frighten the birds, after which he slaughtered them with his bow. The seventh labor was to capture the Cretan bull, father of the Minotaur. Hercules tamed it and delivered it to Eurystheus. The eighth labor was to steal the mares of Diomedes, man-eating horses. Hercules killed their master and fed him to the horses themselves, after which they became obedient. The ninth labor was to obtain the girdle of Queen Hippolyta of the Amazons. Although she agreed to give the girdle willingly, Hera sowed discord, and Hercules had to fight the Amazons to retrieve the girdle. The 10th labor was to steal the cattle of the giant Geryon, a 3-headed monster. Hercules killed Geryon and his dog Orthrus, then drove the cattle to Greece. The 11th labor was to obtain the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides. Hercules persuaded the Titan Atlas, who held up the sky, to fetch the apples, temporarily taking his burden upon himself. Finally, the 12th labor was to bring Cerberus, the 3-headed dog of Hades, from the underworld. Hades allowed Hercules to take the dog if he could manage without weapons. Hercules subdued Cerberus with his bare hands and returned him after completing the task. Having completed the labors, Hercules was absolved of his guilt, but his life remained filled with trials. He was later poisoned by his wife Deianira, who, unknowingly, soaked his tunic in the poison of the Hydra. In torment, Hercules ascended a funeral pyre, and Zeus took him to Olympus, where he became a god, finally reconciled with Hera. Perseus, son of Zeus and the mortal woman Danae, became one of Greece's greatest heroes due to his feat of slaying the Gorgon Medusa. The story of his birth was dramatic in itself. Perseus's mother, Danae, was imprisoned in a bronze tower by her father, King Achilles of Argos, after an oracle prophesied that he would die by his grandson's hand. However, Zeus, smitten with Danae, entered the tower in the form of a shower of gold, and from their union, Perseus was born. Upon learning of the child's birth, Achilles, overcome with fear, locked Danae and Perseus in a wooden chest and cast it into the sea. But Zeus protected them, and the chest washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where they were rescued by the fisherman Dictys, brother of the local king, Polydectes. Polydectes, wishing to marry Danae, saw Perseus as a hindrance. To get rid of the young man, he cunningly sent him on a quest he believed impossible, to bring the head of Medusa, one of the 3 Gorgons. These monsters with hair of snakes lived in a distant cave, and their gaze turned any who looked upon them to stone. Medusa, unlike her immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale, was mortal, but her terrible power made the task a deadly one. Polydectes was sure Perseus would never return. However, the gods of Olympus decided to aid the hero. Athena, who hated Medusa for desecrating her temple, gifted Perseus a polished shield that could serve as a mirror to avoid the Gorgon's deadly gaze. Hermes handed him a sharp, curved sword capable of cleaving even the hardest materials. The nymphs gifted Perseus winged sandals so he could fly, and Hades' cap of invisibility, which made him invisible. Finally, they gave him a magical pouch that could expand to hold Medusa's head. Perseus's journey was fraught with trials. First, he went to the Graeae, 3 old women who shared one eye and one tooth among them. By threatening to take their eye, Perseus forced them to reveal the Gorgon's location. Upon reaching their cave, he found Medusa asleep, using the reflection in the shield to avoid meeting her gaze. Perseus severed her head with a single blow. From the Gorgon's neck sprang the winged horse Pegasus and the warrior Chrysaor, son of Poseidon. Perseus placed Medusa's head in the pouch, and becoming invisible with the cap, escaped from the enraged sisters of Medusa. On his way back, Perseus performed another great feat. While passing through Ethiopia, he saw Andromeda chained to a rock, daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia had boasted that her beauty surpassed that of the sea nymphs, and Poseidon, angered, had sent a sea monster to plague the kingdom. An oracle declared that the only way to save the land was to sacrifice Andromeda. Perseus, seeing the maiden, fell in love and vowed to save her. With the aid of his winged sandals, he soared above the monster and struck it with Hermes' sword. In gratitude, Cepheus and Cassiopeia gave Andromeda in marriage to Perseus. Their descendants became great kings, including the ancestors of Hercules. Returning to Seriphos, Perseus learned that Polydectes continued to harass his mother. Enraged, he appeared at the palace and showed the king Medusa's head, instantly turning him and his retinue to stone. After this, Perseus handed the head to Athena, who placed it on her shield, making it an even more fearsome weapon. He freed Danae, and gave the rule of Seriphos to Dictys. Later, Perseus returned to Argos, where he accidentally killed his grandfather Achilles, fulfilling the oracle's prophecy by throwing a discus during a competition. Unwilling to rule Argos, Perseus exchanged the throne for the city of Tiryns, where he became king and founded a dynasty. Theseus, son of the Athenian king Aegeus and Aethra of Troezen, was a hero whose destiny was closely tied to Athens. His birth was shrouded in mystery. Aegeus, having no heir, went to an oracle, who prophesied that he would have a son but warned him not to open a wineskin until he returned home. In Troezen, Aegeus met Aethra, and misunderstanding the prophecy, spent the night with her. Upon leaving, he hid his sword and sandals beneath a huge stone, telling Aethra that if she bore a son, he should lift the stone and bring these items to Athens to prove his lineage. When Theseus grew up, he easily lifted the stone and set off for Athens, choosing the dangerous land route, where he defeated many brigands, including Procrustes, who stretched or chopped his victims to fit his bed. In Athens, Theseus faced a new threat. His father Aegeus was under the influence of the sorceress Medea, who recognized Theseus as a threat to her son and attempted to poison him. However, Aegeus recognized Theseus's sword, and at the last moment knocked the poison from his hand. Recognized as the heir, Theseus soon learned of the tragic tribute Athens paid to Crete. King Minos, angered by the murder of his son in Athens, demanded every 9 years that 7 youths and 7 maidens be sent as sacrifices to the Minotaur, a monster with the body of a man and the head of a bull, living in a labyrinth built by the ingenious craftsman Daedalus. Theseus, seeking to end this horror, volunteered to go to Crete among the sacrifices. Before sailing, he promised his father to hoist a white sail in case of victory, so Aegeus would know his son was alive. On Crete, Theseus attracted the attention of Ariadne, daughter of Minos. Falling in love with the hero, Ariadne sought Daedalus's help. He gave her a ball of thread, which Theseus could use to find his way out of the labyrinth. Entering the winding corridors, Theseus tied the thread to the entrance and, finding the Minotaur asleep, killed him with powerful blows of his fists. With the aid of the thread, he escaped the labyrinth and fled Crete with Ariadne and the other Athenians. However, the story with Ariadne ended tragically. On the way to Athens, Theseus stopped at the island of Naxos, where, according to one version, he abandoned Ariadne, obeying the will of Dionysus, who had fallen in love with her. Dionysus made Ariadne his wife, and gifted her the constellation of the crown in the heavens. According to another version, Theseus abandoned her out of forgetfulness or betrayal. Returning home, Theseus forgot to hoist the white sail, and his father Aegeus, seeing the black sail and believing his son was dead, threw himself from a cliff into the sea, which has since borne his name, the Aegean Sea. Becoming king of Athens, Theseus performed many feats. He unified Attica, making Athens the center of the region, and instituted the Panathenaic Games in honor of Athena. He participated in the Caledonian boar hunt with other heroes and fought the centaurs when they, drunk at his friend Pirithous' wedding, attacked the guests. Theseus also journeyed with Pirithous to the underworld to abduct Persephone, but was captured by Hades and chained to a rock. He was rescued by Hercules, but Pirithous remained a captive. Theseus's life ended tragically. After many years of rule, he lost popularity in Athens and was exiled. Finding refuge on the island of Skyros, he was treacherously thrown from a cliff by King Lycomedes. However, even after death, Theseus's fame lived on in Athens, and he was considered the city's protector, his exploits inspiring future generations. Odysseus, king of Ithaca, was one of Greece's most cunning heroes, renowned for his intellect, eloquence, and resourcefulness. His adventures, chronicled in Homer's Odyssey, began with the Trojan War, the greatest conflict of the ancient world. The war erupted when Paris, prince of Troy, abducted Helen, wife of the Spartan king Menelaus, seduced by Aphrodite's promise to gift him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. This occurred after Paris was chosen to judge a dispute between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, over a golden apple inscribed with, "To the fairest." Hera offered him power, Athena, wisdom and glory, but Paris chose Aphrodite, incurring the wrath of the other goddesses and leading to war. Menelaus, supported by his brother, King Agamemnon of Mycenae, assembled a vast army of Greek kings and heroes to retrieve Helen and punish Troy. Odysseus, unwilling to leave his wife Penelope and newborn son Telemachus, feigned madness to avoid the draft. He plowed a field and sowed salt. However, Palamedes, sent to fetch him, exposed his ruse by placing the infant Telemachus before the plow. Odysseus stopped to save his son, thus revealing himself, and was forced to join the expedition. The Trojan War lasted for 10 years, and Odysseus played a key role. It was he who convinced Achilles, Greece's greatest warrior, to join the battle, despite the prophecy that he would die in Troy. When the Greeks faced the impregnable walls of the city, built by Poseidon and Apollo, Odysseus devised the plan of the Trojan horse. The Greeks built a massive wooden horse, inside which hid their best warriors, including Odysseus, leaving the horse at Troy's gates as a supposed gift. The Greeks pretended to retreat. The Trojans, believing the war was over, dragged the horse into the city as a trophy. That night, Odysseus and his companions emerged from the horse, opened the gates, and the Greek army stormed into Troy, sacking the city and slaughtering its inhabitants. Helen was returned to Menelaus, but the victory came at a great cost. Many heroes, including Achilles, perished, and Troy was consumed by flames. After the war, Odysseus set sail for home, but his journey stretched to 10 years due to the wrath of Poseidon, whom he had offended by blinding the Cyclops Polyphemus, son of the sea god. Odysseus faced incredible trials. He encountered the sorceress Circe's enchantments, which turned his companions into pigs, but with the help of Hermes, Odysseus compelled her to restore them to human form. He navigated the waters where the sirens sang, enchanting sailors with their voices, and ordered himself tied to the mast to resist their call. Odysseus also survived an encounter with the monsters Scylla and Charybdis, losing many companions. In the underworld, he spoke with the souls of the dead, including the prophet Tiresias, who foretold further trials. After long wanderings, Odysseus returned to Ithaca, where he found his palace overrun by suitors vying for Penelope's hand. Confident of his death, disguised as a beggar with the help of Athena, Odysseus secretly infiltrated his home and, joining forces with his son Telemachus, slaughtered the suitors in a bloody battle. Reunited with Penelope, he restored his rule, but his adventures left a lasting mark on history as an example of human resilience and cunning. Jason, son of King Aeson of Iolcus, was a hero who embarked on a quest for the Golden Fleece, the hide of a magical ram guarded in Colchis by a dragon. His father had been overthrown by his uncle Peleus, who agreed to return the throne to Jason if he retrieved the fleece. Jason assembled a crew of Greece's greatest heroes, including Hercules, Orpheus, Theseus, and the twin brothers Castor and Pollux, and built the ship Argo, which gave the Argonauts their name. The journey was full of dangers. The Argonauts passed through Scylla and Charybdis, encountered the Harpies who tormented the blind King Phineus, and freed him by driving away the monsters. They also survived an encounter with the Symplegades, rocks that clanged together and crushed ships. On Phineus's advice, Jason released a dove, and as the rocks parted to crush the bird, Argo passed swiftly between them. In Colchis, King Aeetes, father of the sorceress Medea, agreed to give the golden fleece if Jason fulfilled 3 tasks: plow a field with fire-breathing bulls, sow it with dragon's teeth from which warriors would grow, and defeat them. Medea, in love with Jason due to Aphrodite's enchantments, helped him, gave him an ointment that protected from the bull's fire, and taught him to throw a stone among the warriors, causing them to fight each other. By night, Medea lulled the dragon guarding the fleece to sleep, and Jason stole it. The Argonauts fled Colchis, pursued by Aeetes' fleet. Medea, to delay her father, killed her brother Absyrtus and scattered his body parts in the sea, forcing Aeetes to gather the remains. Jason and Medea returned to Iolcus, where Peleus refused to give up the throne. Medea tricked Peleus's daughters into killing their father, convincing them it would rejuvenate him. However, Jason and Medea were exiled from Iolcus and settled in Corinth. Later, Jason betrayed Medea, deciding to marry the daughter of the Corinthian king. In revenge, Medea killed Jason's bride and their own children, then fled in a chariot drawn by dragons. Jason, having lost everything, died alone when a part of the old Argo fell upon him. Jason, son of King Aeson of Iolcus, was a hero whose fate was tied to the quest for the Golden Fleece, the hide of a magical ram gifted by the gods to King Aeetes of Colchis. This fleece, hanging on a sacred tree guarded by a sleepless dragon, was considered a symbol of power and prosperity. Aeson had been overthrown by his brother Peleus, who seized the throne of Iolcus. When Jason grew up and appeared in Iolcus to claim his rightful place, Peleus, unwilling to relinquish power, set conditions. Jason must retrieve the Golden Fleece. Peleus was sure this task would lead to the young man's demise, as Colchis lay at the edge of the known world, and the journey was fraught with deadly perils. Jason accepted the challenge and assembled a crew of Greece's greatest heroes. Among the Argonauts, named after the ship Argo, were Hercules, known for his strength, Orpheus, whose music charmed even nature, the twins Castor and Pollux, masters of combat, Theseus, conqueror of the Minotaur, and many others. The ship Argo was built by the craftsman Argus under the patronage of Athena, who placed a piece of the sacred oak from the Dodona grove into its prow, allowing the ship to speak and offer counsel. Thus began one of the most legendary voyages in Greek mythology. The first trial was their arrival at the island of Lemnos, inhabited only by women who had killed their husbands due to betrayal. Queen Hypsipyle seduced Jason, and the Argonauts lingered on the island, almost forgetting their mission. They then encountered the Symplegades, giant rocks in the sea that clanged together, crushing ships. On the advice of the blind prophet Phineus, whom the Argonauts had freed from the Harpies, Jason released a dove. As the rocks parted to crush the bird, Argo passed swiftly between them, and the rocks froze forever, no longer posing a threat. In Colchis, King Aeetes, son of the sun god Helios, was unwilling to give up the Golden Fleece. He agreed to bestow it upon Jason only if he performed 3 impossible tasks: plow a field with fire-breathing bulls, sow it with dragon's teeth from which armed warriors would grow, and defeat them. Aeetes' daughter, the sorceress Medea, fell in love with Jason due to Aphrodite's enchantments, sent by Athena. Medea gave Jason an ointment that protected from the bull's fire, and taught him to throw a stone among the warriors, causing them to fight each other. When Jason completed the tasks, Aeetes still refused to give the fleece. Then Medea lulled the dragon guarding the treasure to sleep with her spells and potions, and Jason stole the fleece, fleeing with Medea on Argo. Aeetes' pursuit was relentless. His fleet chased the Argonauts at sea. To delay her father, Medea committed a terrible act. She killed her younger brother Absyrtus, hacking his body into pieces and throwing them into the sea. This forced Aeetes to gather his son's remains, giving the Argonauts a chance to escape. However, the gods, angered by this crime, sent storms upon Jason and Medea, and the oracle on Argo ordered them to purify themselves. They traveled to Circe, the sorceress and sister of Aeetes, who performed a purification ritual. Returning to Iolcus, Jason learned that Peleus had no intention of giving up the throne. Medea, using her cunning, convinced Peleus's daughters that they could rejuvenate their father by cutting him up and boiling him in a cauldron with magical herbs. The daughters believed, killed Peleus, But Medea did not add the herbs, and the king died. However, instead of the throne, Jason and Medea were exiled from Iolcus for this crime. They settled in Corinth, where they had children. Over time, Jason decided to marry the daughter of the Corinthian king Creon, betraying Medea. In fury, Medea took revenge. She gifted Jason's bride a poisoned dress that burned her alive, and then killed her own children to punish Jason. Flying away in a chariot drawn by dragons, Medea left Jason alone. His life ended tragically. Many years later, sitting beneath the decaying Argo, he was crushed by a falling beam of the ship. Orpheus, son of the god Apollo and the muse Calliope, was the greatest musician and poet of ancient Greece. His voice and playing of the lyre, gifted to him by his father, possessed magical power. They made wild beasts lie at his feet, trees bow to him, and rivers slow their course to listen to his melodies. Orpheus joined the Argonauts, and his music saved them more than once. He drowned out the siren's song, helped them pass the Symplegades, and calmed the sea during a storm. However, his most famous story is connected to his love for the nymph, Eurydice. Orpheus met Eurydice in the forests of Thrace, and their love ignited instantly. Their wedding was filled with joy. Orpheus's music filled the air, and even the gods descended from Olympus to bless their union. But happiness was short-lived. Shortly after the wedding, Eurydice, walking in the forest, attracted the attention of a shepherd named Aristeus, who attempted to pursue her. Fleeing from him, she stepped on a poisonous snake, and the bite proved fatal. Eurydice died, leaving Orpheus in deep despair. Unable to accept his loss, Orpheus decided to descend into the underworld to retrieve his beloved. Taking his lyre, he journeyed to the river Styx, where the ferryman Charon, charmed by his music, agreed to ferry him across for free. Cerberus, the three-headed dog guarding Hades' gate, was calmed by the sounds of the lyre and allowed Orpheus to pass. In the very heart of the underworld, Orpheus stood before Hades and Persephone. His mournful melody and words, filled with love, touched even Hades' cold heart. Persephone, recalling her own separation from her mother, pleaded with her husband to have mercy. Hades agreed to let Eurydice go, but with one condition. Orpheus must leave the underworld without looking back until he and Eurydice are on the surface. If he looks back, Eurydice will vanish forever. Orpheus began his ascent along the dark path, playing his lyre to guide Eurydice behind him. He heard her footsteps, but doubts tormented him. Was she following him, or had Hades deceived him? As the light of the surface was already visible, Orpheus could not bear it, and looked back to make sure Eurydice was there. In that instant, she vanished, dissolving into the shadows with a sad cry. Orpheus tried to return to the underworld, but Charon refused to ferry him again, and Hades' gates remained closed. Orpheus returned to Earth, devastated by grief. He wandered through Thrace, avoiding people and playing mournful melodies that made even the stones weep. His music attracted the Maenads, wild followers of Dionysus, who, in their ecstasy, invited him to join their dances. But Orpheus, loyal to Eurydice's memory, refused them. Enraged by his rejection, the Maenads fell upon him, tearing his body apart. His head and lyre were thrown into the river Hebrus, but even in death, they continued to sing of their love for Eurydice. The river carried them to the island of Lesbos, where the inhabitants buried them with honors, and the muses of Apollo erected a sanctuary in Orpheus's honor. It is said that the gods took pity on Orpheus and placed his soul in Elysium, where he was finally reunited with Eurydice. His lyre was placed by Zeus among the stars, becoming the constellation Lyra, and his songs remained in the memory of men as a symbol of eternal love and the power of art. Bellerophon, son of King Glaucus of Corinth and grandson of Sisyphus, was one of Greece's greatest heroes, renowned for his victory over the Chimera. His story began with a tragic accident. Bellerophon inadvertently killed his brother, leading to his exile from Corinth. He found refuge in Tiryns with King Proetus, but another trial awaited him there. Proetus's wife, Queen Stheneboa, fell in love with Bellerophon and attempted to seduce him. The young man, loyal to his honor, rejected her, and the offended queen lied to her husband, accusing Bellerophon of molestation. Proetus, unwilling to personally execute a guest and break the laws of hospitality, sent Bellerophon to his father-in-law, King Iobates of Lycia, with a sealed letter asking him to kill the hero. Iobates, after reading the letter, decided not to kill Bellerophon directly but sent him on a quest he believed to be deadly: to slay the Chimera, a monster with the body of a lion, the head of a goat on its back, and a serpent's tail that spewed fire. The Chimera ravaged the lands of Lycia, burning fields and killing inhabitants. Bellerophon, realizing the danger, appealed to the gods for help. Athena, admiring his bravery, appeared to him in a dream and gifted him a golden bridle capable of taming the winged horse Pegasus, born from Medusa's blood. Bellerophon found Pegasus at the sacred spring of Perine in Corinth. After a long struggle, he put on the bridle and tamed the horse, becoming the first mortal to ride this divine creature. With Pegasus, Bellerophon soared into the sky and went to the Chimera's lair. The monster spewed fire, but Bellerophon, flying above it on Pegasus, evaded the flames and showered the Chimera with arrows. In a decisive moment, he attached a piece of lead to his spear and hurled it into the Chimera's maw. The monster's fire melted the lead, which lodged in its throat, choking the monster. Bellerophon returned to Lycia victorious. Iobates, impressed by the feat, decided to test Bellerophon further, sending him to fight the warlike Solymi and the Amazons. Bellerophon defeated all his enemies, and then Iobates set an ambush, sending his best warriors, but the hero defeated them too, proving his unmatched prowess. Realizing that Bellerophon was under the protection of the gods, Iobates abandoned his intent to kill him, gave him his daughter Philonoe in marriage, and made him heir to the Lycian kingdom. However, glory went to Bellerophon's head. He became arrogant and decided to fly to Olympus on Pegasus, to equal the gods. Zeus, angered by his audacity, sent a gadfly that stung Pegasus. The horse threw Bellerophon off, and he fell to the earth, becoming crippled. Alone and broken, Bellerophon wandered the land for the rest of his days, becoming an example of how pride can ruin even the greatest hero. Pegasus, however, was ascended to Olympus, where he served Zeus, carrying his thunderbolts. Sisyphus, great-grandfather of Bellerophon and king of Corinth, was known for his cunning but also for his treachery, which led to his eternal punishment. Sisyphus was renowned for founding the Isthmian Games and making Corinth a prosperous city. However, his cunning often crossed the bounds of what was permissible. Once, he angered Zeus by revealing to the river god, Asopus, where he had taken his daughter Aegina. As punishment, Zeus sent Thanatos, the god of death, to take Sisyphus to the underworld, but Sisyphus outwitted Thanatos. He asked the god to show him how the chains he intended to bind him with worked. As soon as Thanatos put the chains on himself, Sisyphus locked him up and refused to release him. Without Thanatos, no one in the world could die. Warriors continued to fight despite mortal wounds, and the sick suffered endlessly. Ares, the god of war, in a rage, freed Thanatos, and Sisyphus was captured. However, before dying, Sisyphus prepared a new plan. He instructed his wife Merope not to perform funeral rites, so his soul would not be accepted into the underworld. Hades, complaining that without rites he could not remain, asked permission to return to Earth to punish his wife. Hades agreed, but Sisyphus, upon his return, refused to die, enjoying life until he was forcibly taken. For his deceptions, Sisyphus received one of the harshest punishments in Greek mythology. In Tartarus, he was condemned to forever push a giant boulder to the top of a mountain. Every time he was close to the summit, the boulder would roll back down, forcing Sisyphus to begin again. This punishment became a symbol of fruitless effort and eternal struggle. However, some accounts say that Sisyphus found meaning in his labor, accepting it as a challenge to his will. Atalanta, one of the few heroines in Greek mythology, was the daughter of the king of Arcadia, who, desiring a son, left her in the forest. She was rescued by a she-bear sent by Artemis and grew up in the forests, becoming a skilled huntress and runner, unmatched among mortals. She vowed to remain a virgin, dedicating herself to Artemis and ruthlessly killing all who attempted to court her. Atalanta gained fame for her participation in the hunt for the Caledonian boar, a giant beast sent by Artemis as punishment for King Oeneus forgetting to offer her a sacrifice. The boar ravaged the fields and killed inhabitants. Oeneus summoned the heroes of Greece, including Jason, Theseus, Castor, Pollux, and Meleager, son of Oeneus. Atalanta joined the hunt, despite the disapproval of some men who believed a woman had no place among them. During the hunt, the boar killed several heroes, but Atalanta was the first to wound it with an arrow, and Meleager finished off the beast with a spear. In love with Atalanta, Meleager gifted her the boar's hide as a trophy, which angered his uncles, his mother's brothers. They attempted to seize the hide, and Meleager killed them in a fight. This act led to tragedy. Meleager's mother, Althea, upon learning of her brothers' deaths, remembered a prophecy. Her son's life was tied to a log that burned in the hearth at his birth. In anger, she threw the log into the fire, and Meleager was consumed by flames, lamenting his fate. Atalanta, mourning her friend, left Calydon, but her fame as a huntress only grew. Later, Atalanta's father, learning of her exploits, recognized his daughter and demanded she marry. Unwilling to break her vow, Atalanta announced she would only marry the man who defeated her in a foot race, with the losers being executed. Many suitors perished, but Hippomenes, inspired by Aphrodite, volunteered to compete. The goddess gave him 3 golden apples, which he threw during the race. Atalanta, distracted by the apples, slowed down and lost. She married Hippomenes, but their happiness was short-lived. Forgetting to thank Aphrodite, they were transformed into lions for disrespecting the goddess and condemned to pull her chariot. Oedipus, son of the Theban king Laius and queen Jocasta, became one of Greek mythology's most tragic heroes, whose fate was predetermined by prophecy. Even before his birth, the oracle prophesied to Laius that his son would kill his father and marry his mother. Terrified by this prophecy, Laius ordered the infant Oedipus's ankles pierced and left him on Mount Cithaeron to die. However, a shepherd tasked with this deed took pity on the child and gave him to another shepherd, who took Oedipus to Corinth. There, the childless king Polybus and his wife Merope adopted the boy, raising him as their own son. Oedipus grew up strong and intelligent, but one day, hearing from a drunken guest that he was not Polybus's true son, he went to the Delphic oracle to learn the truth. The oracle did not answer his question but prophesied that Oedipus would kill his father and marry his mother. Believing Polybus and Merope to be his true parents, Oedipus swore never to return to Corinth. To avoid this terrible fate, he set off for Thebes, unaware that it was there that fateful events awaited him. At a crossroads, Oedipus encountered a stranger in a chariot who rudely demanded he yield the way. A quarrel erupted, and in anger, Oedipus killed the stranger and his retinue, unaware that it was his own father, King Laius. Continuing his journey to Thebes, Oedipus faced a new challenge, the Sphinx, a monster with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the head of a woman. The Sphinx terrorized Thebes, posing a riddle to travelers. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Those who could not answer were killed by the Sphinx. Oedipus, without hesitation, replied, "Man, for in infancy he crawls on 4 legs, in adulthood walks on 2, and in old age leans on a cane." Defeated by the correct answer, the Sphinx, in despair, threw herself from a cliff and perished. The Thebans, grateful for their liberation from the monster, proclaimed Oedipus their king, as Laius was dead. Oedipus married Laius's widow, Jocasta, unaware she was his mother. They had 4 children, 2 sons, Eteocles and Polynices, and 2 daughters, Antigone and Ismene. Years later, Thebes was struck by a plague, and the oracle declared it would not cease until the killer of Laius was punished. Oedipus, determined to find the culprit, began an investigation that led to the horrifying truth. The prophet Tiresias and the shepherd, who knew of the infant's fate, revealed that Oedipus himself had killed Laius and married his mother. And Jocasta, unable to bear the shame, hanged herself. Oedipus, driven mad by grief, gouged out his eyes with gold brooches from her dress and left Thebes, becoming a blind wanderer led by his daughter Antigone. He died in exile in Colonus, where, according to legend, his grave became sacred. Following Oedipus's exile from Thebes, brought about by his tragic fate, the city plunged into chaos, fueled by the power struggle between his sons Eteocles and Polynices. According to an agreement, they were to rule Thebes in turns, each succeeding the other annually. However, Eteocles, who took the throne first, refused to yield it to Polynices when his term expired, accusing his brother of unworthiness. Polynices, burning with anger and a sense of betrayal, left Thebes and sought refuge in Argos under King Adrastus, known for his hospitality and wisdom. There, Polynices met Tydeus, another exile, and together they enlisted Adrastus's support to reclaim the throne. Adrastus, moved by their story and inspired by a prophecy, assembled an army of 7 great warriors, each to lead an assault on one of Thebes' 7 gates. These heroes became known as the 7 against Thebes. Among the 7 were distinguished figures: Adrastus himself, king of Argos, whose wisdom and nobility made him the leader of the expedition; Tydeus, a fierce warrior whose strength was comparable to Hercules; Amphiaraus, a prophet who knew his fate, but was compelled to participate due to his wife's betrayal; Capaneus, proud and audacious, boasting that he would capture Thebes even against the will of the gods; Hypermnestor, a giant and master of combat; Parthenopaeus, young and swift, like the wind; and Polynices, whose thirst for vengeance was the driving force of the expedition. Each of them was connected by other bonds of friendship, kinship, or common destiny, but they were united by a shared goal: to destroy Thebes and restore justice for Polynices. Before the expedition, Amphiaraus, possessing the gift of foresight, prophesied that all 7, except Adrastus, would perish. He tried to refuse participation, but his wife Eriphylla, bribed by Polynices with the precious necklace of Harmonia, a sacred gift from Aphrodite, forced him to join. This necklace, cursed since its creation, carried misfortune to all who touched it and was responsible for many tragedies. Amphiaraus, knowing of the betrayal, cursed his wife but went on the expedition, obeying fate. The siege of Thebes was grand and bloody. Each of the city's 7 gates was attacked by one of the commanders, and the defenders of Thebes, led by Achilles, fought with desperate resolve. Capaneus, in his arrogance, climbed the walls, shouting that even Zeus could not stop him, but was struck by a thunderbolt from the heavens, becoming an example of divine retribution. Tydeus, wounded in battle, killed his opponent, but before dying, in a frenzy inspired by Athena, he cracked his enemy's skull and drank his blood, which caused disgust even in the goddess who favored him. Amphiaraus, foreseeing defeat, fled the battlefield, but the earth opened beneath him at Zeus's command, and he was swallowed along with his chariot. Later, his sanctuary became a place of prophecy. The climax of the battle was a duel between the brothers Eteocles and Polynices at the 7th gate. Cursed in their childhood by their father Oedipus for their arrogance, they met in a deadly combat, burning with hatred. Each inflicted a mortal blow on the other, and the brothers fell, embracing in death as they could not reconcile in life. Thebes stood, but the city was devastated by grief and destruction. Adrastus, the sole survivor of the 7, returned to Argos, mourning his companions. After the battle, Antigone, sister of Eteocles and Polynices, decided to honor Polynices' memory, despite the prohibition of the new king Creon, who declared him a traitor and forbade his burial. Antigone, loyal to her family duty, secretly sprinkled earth on her brother's body, performing a symbolic funeral rite. For this, Creon condemned her to be immured in a cave. Haemon, Creon's son and Antigone's fiancé, tried to persuade his father to spare her, but Creon was unyielding. In despair, Haemon broke into the cave, only to find Antigone hanged. In rage, he took his own life, and his mother, Eurydice, upon learning of her son's death, also took her own life. Creon was left alone, cursing his cruelty and mourning the loss of his family. 10 years later, the sons of the 7 against Thebes, known as the Epigoni, decided to avenge their fathers. Led by Alcmaeon, son of Amphiaraus, they gathered a new army and attacked Thebes. This time the city did not stand. The Epigoni captured and destroyed it, concluding the cycle of tragedy begun by Oedipus's curse. Alcmaeon, fulfilling his father's will, killed his mother Eriphylla for her betrayal. But this murder incurred the wrath of the Erinyes, the goddesses of vengeance, and he wandered, pursued by madness, until he found atonement. Achilles, son of King Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, was the greatest warrior of the Trojan War, whose fame and tragic fate made him a legend. His mother Thetis, knowing the prophecy that Achilles would either live a long but obscure life or die young but be immortalized, tried to protect him. As an infant, she dipped him in the waters of the river Styx, making his body invulnerable except for his heel, which she held. To save her son from war, Thetis hid him on the island of Skyros, among the daughters of King Lycomedes, disguised as a girl. However, Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, knew that without Achilles, the Greeks could not conquer Troy. Arriving at Skyros, he laid out gifts, jewelry, and weapons, and blew a war horn. Achilles, unable to resist, grabbed a sword and shield, revealing himself, and was forced to join the expedition. The Trojan War began because of the abduction of Helen, wife of the Spartan king Menelaus, by the Trojan prince Paris, seduced by Aphrodite's promise to grant him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, gathered a vast army of Greek heroes, including Odysseus, Ajax, Diomedes, and Nestor, to retrieve Helen and destroy Troy. Achilles, leading his Myrmidons, became the terror of the Trojans. His speed, strength, and skill in battle were unparalleled, and his fury on the battlefield inspired dread. It was said that Ares, god of war, watched Achilles with envy. However, Achilles' pride led to conflict, and Agamemnon, commander-in-chief of the Greeks, took away his captive Briseis, whom Achilles considered his prize. Offended, Achilles refused to fight, withdrawing to his tent. Without him, the Greeks began to suffer defeat, and the Trojans, led by Hector, son of King Priam, pushed them back to their ships. Patroclus, Achilles' best friend and companion, begged him to let him lead the Myrmidons into battle, wearing his armor to instill fear in the enemy. Achilles agreed but warned Patroclus not to chase the Trojans to the walls of the city. Patroclus, carried away by the battle, disobeyed and clashed with Hector, who killed him, mistaking him for Achilles himself. The death of Patroclus ignited an uncontrollable fury in Achilles. His mother Thetis, mourning her son, asked Hephaestus to forge new armor. Achilles' shield, adorned with scenes of peace and war, became a masterpiece of divine craftsmanship. Returning to battle, Achilles sowed death among the Trojans, driving them back to the walls of Troy. He met Hector at the Scaean Gate and, after a fierce struggle, killed him with his spear. Not content with victory, Achilles tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it around Troy in full view of his family. This continued for days, until Priam, moved by fatherly love, came to Achilles' camp with a plea to return his son's body. Touched by the king's grief and instructed by Zeus, Achilles agreed, allowing the Trojans to bury Hector with honors. The prophecy of Achilles' death came true soon after. During another battle, Paris, guided by Apollo, who was angered by Achilles' pride, shot an arrow that struck the hero in the heel, his only vulnerable spot. Achilles fell, and his death became a turning point in the war. The Greeks honored him with magnificent funeral games, but his armor caused a dispute between Odysseus and Ajax Telamonius, a great warrior and Achilles' cousin. When the armor was awarded to Odysseus, Ajax, overcome by madness inflicted by Athena, attacked a flock of sheep, mistaking them for enemies, and then, realizing his shame, took his own life. Despite these losses, the Greeks achieved victory due to Odysseus's cunning Trojan horse. The wooden horse, filled with warriors, was accepted by the Trojans as a gift, leading to the fall of the city. Helen was returned to Menelaus, but Troy lay in ruins, and Achilles' fame remained eternal. Daedalus, the greatest craftsman and inventor of ancient Greece, was renowned for his brilliant mind and ability to create astonishing mechanisms. A native of Athens, he was of royal descent and a master in many crafts, from sculpture to architecture. His most famous creation was the labyrinth on Crete, built for King Minos to hide and contain the Minotaur, a monster with the body of a man and the head of a bull, born from the union of Minos's wife Pasiphae and a bull sent by Poseidon. The labyrinth was so intricate that no one who entered could find their way out without assistance. However, Daedalus's talent led to his downfall, as he became entangled in events that led to his exile and tragedy. Daedalus came to Crete after being exiled from Athens for murdering his nephew Talos, a gifted youth who began to surpass his master in skill. Envy drove Daedalus to commit the crime. He pushed Talos from the Acropolis, and for this, the Athenians exiled him. On Crete, Minos took in Daedalus, valuing his genius, but later, the king became enraged with the craftsman for his role in the Minotaur's affair. Daedalus aided Pasiphae by creating a wooden cow for her to deceive the bull, and then built the labyrinth to hide her shame. When Theseus, with the help of Ariadne, killed the Minotaur and escaped, using a thread guided by Daedalus, Minos was furious. He imprisoned Daedalus and his son Icarus in a tower on Crete, forbidding them to leave the island. But Daedalus, whose mind knew no bounds, found a way to escape. Gathering feathers from seabirds and binding them with wax, he created 2 pairs of wings for himself and Icarus. Before their flight, Daedalus sternly instructed his son, Do not fly too high, lest the sun melt the wax, and do not fly too low, lest the sea dampen the feathers. They took flight from the tower, leaving Crete behind, and headed for freedom. Icarus, however, was young and exhilarated by the flight. Overcome with joy, he soared higher, ignoring his father's warning. The sun melted the wax holding the wings together, and Icarus fell into the sea, which was later named the Icarian Sea in his honor. Daedalus, mourning his son, continued his flight and reached Sicily, where he found refuge with King Cocolus. Minos, learning of Daedalus's escape, pursued him. He arrived in Sicily, and cunningly tried to lure Daedalus out by offering King Cocolus a task to thread a string through a spiral seashell. Daedalus, in hiding at the court, solved the puzzle by tying the string to an ant, which crawled through the shell. Minos realized Daedalus was there, but Cocolus's daughters, grateful to the craftsman for his invention, protected him. They lured Minos into a bathhouse and scalded him with boiling water, killing the king. Daedalus lived out the rest of his life in exile, creating new masterpieces, but tragedy and retribution remained forever in his heart, becoming a symbol of human hubris and the consequences of disobedience. Ares, son of Zeus and Hera, was the god of war, embodying the chaos, brutality, and violence of the battlefield. Unlike Athena, who represented the strategic aspect of warfare, Ares reveled in destruction and bloodshed. He was considered indomitable and impulsive, and even the other gods of Olympus often disdained him for his unruly temper. Ares rarely appeared in myths as a protagonist, but his presence was felt in every major conflict, including the Trojan War, where he fought on the side of the Trojans, supporting his son Aeneas and his lover Aphrodite. Ares was the father of many children, both from goddesses and mortal women. His affair with Aphrodite, despite her marriage to Hephaestus, became one of the most famous scandals on Olympus. When Hephaestus caught the lovers in a magical net and exposed them to ridicule by the gods, Ares merely laughed, feeling no shame. From Aphrodite, he fathered children, including Eros, the god of love, Phobos and Deimos, embodying the fear and terror that accompanied their father in battle. Among his mortal children were the warrior Amazons and heroes like Cycnus, who challenged Hercules and was killed. On one occasion, Ares himself was defeated. During the Trojan War, Athena, aiding the Greeks, guided the hero Diomedes' spear into Ares, wounding him. Ares fled to Olympus in pain, where Zeus, annoyed by his complaints, called him the most hateful of gods but healed him nonetheless. In another myth, Ares was humiliated when the giants Otus and Ephialtes, sons of Poseidon, captured him and imprisoned him in a bronze chest for 13 months. Only Hermes, learning of his captivity, freed Ares, but his reputation suffered. Despite his brutality, Ares was worshipped in some regions, particularly in Sparta, where warriors offered him sacrifices before battles. His symbols were the spear, helmet, and vulture, and his chariot, drawn by fiery horses, inspired terror. Although Ares was rarely depicted as wise or noble, his role in myths underscored the inevitability of war in human life and its destructive power. Demeter, goddess of agriculture, fertility, and harvest, was one of the most revered goddesses in Greece, as human survival depended on her. Her connection to the earth and the cycles of nature made her a central figure in the myth of Persephone, which explains the changing seasons. But Demeter also played a key role in the Eleusinian mysteries, religious rites that promised the initiated blessings in life and in the afterlife. After Persephone's abduction by Hades, Demeter, consumed by grief, wandered the world searching for her daughter. Disguised as an old woman, she came to Eleusis, a city near Athens, where she was welcomed into the home of King Celeus and his wife Metanira. In gratitude for their kindness, Demeter decided to make their son Triptolemus immortal by secretly anointing him with ambrosia and tempering him in fire. However, Metanira, seeing this, cried out in horror, interrupting the ritual. Enraged, Demeter revealed her divine nature and demanded a temple be built in Eleusis where she would be worshipped. She also taught Celeus's son, Triptolemus, the art of agriculture, and gifted him a chariot drawn by dragons, so he could spread the knowledge of farming throughout the world. The Eleusinian mysteries, established by Demeter, became one of Greece's most sacred rituals. They were held annually and involved secret ceremonies accessible only to the initiated. Participants underwent purification, fasting, and processions, culminating in the revelation of Demeter's sacred symbols within the temple. It was believed that the initiated would gain hope for a better fate in the underworld. The mysteries were kept in strict secrecy, and breaking the vow of silence was punishable by death. Demeter was also connected to other myths. She severely punished those who desecrated her gifts. For example, Erysichthon, king of Thessaly, cut down Demeter's sacred grove, for which she inflicted him with insatiable hunger. Erysichthon sold all his possessions, including his daughter, to appease his hunger, but ultimately ate himself. This myth underscored the sanctity of nature and Demeter's wrath for its desecration. Hestia, goddess of the hearth, home, and family, was one of the most revered but least prominent figures among the Olympians. The eldest sister of Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, and Demeter, she was the first to be swallowed by their father Cronus, and the last to be freed from his belly by Zeus. Hestia was known for her gentle disposition and avoided conflict, preferring peace and stability. Her role was to maintain the sacred fire of the hearth, a symbol of home and community, which was considered the center of life for every family and city. In every Greek home and temple, a hearth burned in honor of Hestia, and before meals, the first offerings were made to her to ensure blessings and harmony. Hestia was one of the 3 virgin goddesses of Olympus, alongside Athena and Artemis. She vowed to remain chaste, rejecting the advances of Poseidon and Apollo, who courted her. Zeus, respecting her choice, granted her a place of honor in the center of every home and temple. When Dionysus, god of wine, was accepted into Olympus as one of the 12 Olympians, Hestia voluntarily ceded her seat to him to avoid disputes, preferring to remain in the background and tend to the sacred fire. Though myths about Hestia are few, her presence was felt everywhere. She was worshipped as Vesta, and her cult was particularly important. The Vestal virgins maintained the eternal flame in her temple, and its extinguishing was considered a bad omen for the city. Hestia symbolized stability and unity, and her modesty made her beloved among mortals. One of the few myths about her tells of her protecting the infant Dionysus from Hera's wrath by hiding him in her temple, highlighting her role as protector and guardian. Hestia rarely interfered in the affairs of gods or mortals, but her influence was immense. She was the embodiment of domestic warmth, and her fire was considered the link between the mortal world and the gods. Even in great myths, such as the Trojan War, her presence was felt in rituals, as heroes offered sacrifices before battles, praying for the protection of their homes. Hestia remained a symbol of peace and stability in a world filled with chaos and conflict. Aeneas, son of Aphrodite and the mortal Anchises, was a Trojan hero whose destiny linked Greek mythology to the founding of Rome. During the Trojan War, Aeneas fought on the side of the Trojans, being one of their finest warriors after Hector. His bravery and piety drew the attention of the gods, especially his mother Aphrodite, who repeatedly protected him from danger. When the Greeks captured Troy with the aid of the Trojan horse, Aeneas, obeying the will of the gods, fled the burning city, carrying his aged father Anchises on his shoulders, leading his son Ascanius by the hand, and carrying the sacred relics of Troy, statues of the gods, and the eternal flame. Aeneas's journey, described in Virgil's Aeneid, was fraught with trials. The gods, particularly Juno, the Roman Hera, who hated the Trojans for Paris's judgment, sent storms to plague his fleet and prevent his arrival. Aeneas and his companions found themselves in Carthage, where Queen Dido fell in love with the hero, captivated by his tales of Troy. Aphrodite, Venus in Roman tradition, supported their love, but Jupiter, Zeus, reminded Aeneas of his destiny to found a new city. Aeneas abandoned Dido, despite her pleas, and the queen, in despair, took her own life, cursing Aeneas and his descendants. Her curse became the cause of future wars between Carthage and Rome. After long wanderings, Aeneas reached Italy, where an oracle prophesied that his descendants would found a great empire. In Latium, in the lands of King Latinus, Aeneas sought the hand of his daughter Lavinia to strengthen an alliance. However, Lavinia was already promised to Turnus, king of the Rutuli. Juno, continuing her revenge, ignited a war between Aeneas and Turnus. In the decisive battle, Aeneas defeated Turnus in single combat, proving his right to Lavinia and the land. He founded the city of Lavinium, named after his wife, and his son Ascanius later founded Alba Longa, the precursor to Rome. According to legend, Aeneas's descendants, Romulus and Remus, became the founders of Rome itself. Aeneas was not only a warrior but also a symbol of piety, always following the will of the gods. His journey from a ruined Troy to a new homeland became a metaphor for resilience and faith in destiny. In Roman tradition, Aeneas was revered as the progenitor of the Roman people, and his connection to Aphrodite emphasized the divine origin of Rome. Pygmalion, king of Cyprus and an unparalleled sculptor, was a man whose life revolved around art. His talent was so great that the statues he created seemed alive, and their beauty struck all who saw them. However, Pygmalion was disillusioned with the women of his island. He considered them frivolous and unworthy, rejecting their company and avoiding marriage. Some accounts say his aversion to women was caused by observing prostitution in the temples of Aphrodite, or the immorality of local priestesses, which offended his sense of beauty. Instead of seeking love, Pygmalion dedicated himself to his craft, finding solace in working with marble and ivory. One day, driven by a desire to create an ideal of perfect beauty, Pygmalion carved a statue of a woman from ivory, whom he named Galatea, meaning milky white, in honor of her flawless complexion. This statue was his masterpiece. Her features were so finely carved that she seemed to breathe, and her eyes, though of bone, seemed to glow with life. Pygmalion fell in love with his creation. He adorned Galatea with exquisite garments, wove flowers into her hair, adorned her with jewels, and even spoke to her as if she were a living woman. He brought her gifts, laid her on a soft bed, and wished she were his wife. But each time he touched the cold surface of the statue, he felt the pain of loneliness. A great festival in honor of Aphrodite, goddess of love, whose temple in Paphos was a center of worship, was approaching in Cyprus. Pygmalion, despite his disillusionment with women, respected Aphrodite as the embodiment of beauty and passion. During the festival, he offered a prayer at her altar, but fearing to ask the impossible, he did not dare directly beg for the statue to be brought to life. Instead, he asked the goddess for a wife like his Galatea. Aphrodite, seeing the sincerity of his heart and the purity of his love, decided to fulfill his wish beyond expectation. When Pygmalion returned home and, as usual, touched the statue, he felt its surface grow warm. The bone turned into soft skin, her hair became silken, and her eyes shone with life. Galatea came alive, smiled at her creator, and responded to his love. Pygmalion and Galatea married, and their union was blessed by Aphrodite herself. They had a daughter, whom they named Paphos, after the sacred city where the goddess's main temple was located. Some versions of the myth say that their son Cinyras became king of Cyprus and founded a dynasty, but his life was overshadowed by tragedy when his daughter Mira, cursed by Aphrodite, fell in love with her father and bore him Adonis, the goddess's beloved. The story of Pygmalion and Galatea became a symbol of the power of art and love, capable of overcoming the boundaries between the inanimate and the living. However, it also raised questions about the nature of the ideal. Was Pygmalion's love for Galatea genuine, or did he love only the image he had created? This myth inspired poets and artists, highlighting Aphrodite's power over the hearts and creations of mortals. Adonis, son of Cinyras and Myrrha, or Smyrna, was a youth whose beauty captivated even Aphrodite, the goddess of love. His birth was marred by a curse. Myrrha, in love with her father due to Aphrodite's wrath, tricked and seduced Cinyras. When Cinyras discovered the truth, he in his rage attempted to kill his daughter, but the gods transformed her into a myrrh tree, from which Adonis was later born. Aphrodite, upon seeing the infant, was struck by his beauty and hid him in a chest, entrusting him to the care of Persephone, queen of the underworld. However, Persephone, enchanted by Adonis, refused to return him, and a dispute erupted between the goddesses. Zeus decreed that Adonis would spend a third of the year with Aphrodite, a third with Persephone, and a third of his own choosing. Adonis chose to stay with Aphrodite, which incurred Persephone's jealousy. Aphrodite accompanied Adonis everywhere, enjoying his company and teaching him hunting, but warning him to avoid dangerous beasts. However, Adonis, with youthful bravado, one day chased a great boar. According to one version, the boar was sent by Ares, who was jealous of Adonis, and according to another, by Persephone, who wished to reclaim the youth for the underworld. The boar mortally wounded Adonis, and Aphrodite, hearing his cries, rushed to him. But it was too late. From Adonis's blood grew anemones, and his soul departed to Persephone. In his memory, Aphrodite established the festival of Adonis, where women mourned his death, planting gardens of Adonis, quickly withering plants, symbolizing his short life. The myth of Adonis underscored the connection between love, beauty, and death, reflecting the cycles of nature. His life and death symbolized the growth and decay of plants. The cult of Adonis was particularly popular among women, who saw in him the embodiment of vulnerable beauty and tragic love. Narcissus, son of the river god Cephissus and the nymph Liriope, was a youth of extraordinary beauty. But his heart was cold and proud. An oracle prophesied that Narcissus would live long if he did not know himself. From his youth, he rejected all who fell in love with him, whether mortals or nymphs. Among his admirers was the mountain nymph Echo, who, due to Hera's curse, could only repeat the words of others. Echo was once eloquent, but Hera, annoyed by her chatter, deprived her of her own voice for distracting the goddess while Zeus dallied with nymphs. Echo, seeing Narcissus in the forest, fell in love with him and followed him. When Narcissus, hearing footsteps, cried, "Who is here?" Echo could only repeat his words. Finally, she emerged from hiding and tried to embrace the youth. But Narcissus rudely rejected her, mocking her feelings. Humiliated, Echo hid in caves, where her body withered away from grief, leaving only her voice echoing in the mountains. Other rejected lovers of Narcissus cried out to the gods for vengeance, and Nemesis, goddess of retribution, heard them. One day, Narcissus approached a clear spring and saw his reflection in the water. Not realizing it was merely an image, he fell in love with it, captivated by his own beauty. He could not tear himself away from the reflection, whispering words of love and reaching out his hands to the water. Narcissus wasted away from unrequited passion, refusing food and drink until he died by the spring. In his place grew a flower, named the Narcissus, whose petals bowed towards the water, as if in eternal contemplation. The myth of Narcissus and Echo became a symbol of self-love, and the tragedy of unrequited love. The word narcissism originated from the hero's name, and the echo in the mountain serves as a reminder of the nymph's sad fate, whose love remained unanswered. Psyche, a mortal woman whose beauty rivaled Aphrodite's, became the heroine of one of the most romantic myths. Her beauty attracted crowds of admirers who revered her as a goddess, which incurred Aphrodite's wrath. The goddess ordered her son Eros, god of love, to make Psyche fall in love with a monster. However, Eros, upon seeing Psyche, fell in love with her himself. He secretly carried her to his magnificent palace, where he visited her every night but forbade her to look at him, hiding his divine nature. Psyche, happy but curious, succumbed to her sister's entreaties, who sowed doubts in her mind about her husband. One night, she lit a lamp and saw Eros, amazed by his beauty. But a drop of hot oil fell on the god, and he, feeling betrayed, abandoned her. Psyche, in despair, set out to find her beloved. Aphrodite, learning of her son's love, subjected Psyche to harsh trials. She had to sort mountains of grain, retrieve the golden fleece, and even descend into the underworld for a box of Persephone's beauty. With the help of gods and nature, Psyche completed the tasks, but by opening the box out of curiosity, she fell into a deep sleep. Eros, healed from his wound and longing, found Psyche and woke her. He implored Zeus to make Psyche immortal, and he agreed. Psyche became the goddess of the soul, and their marriage was celebrated on Olympus. Their daughter Voluptus symbolized pleasure. The myth of Psyche and Eros symbolizes the soul's struggle for love and overcoming trials for divine union. Prometheus, one of the Titans, son of Iapetus and Clymene, became a hero of mankind due to his rebellion against Zeus for the sake of saving humans. When Zeus created humankind, he decided to keep them subservient, withholding fire from mortals, which was considered a divine gift. Without fire, humans lived in cold and darkness, unable to cook food or defend themselves against predators. Prometheus, known for his cunning and compassion for humans, could not bear to watch their suffering. He decided to defy the king of the gods. Ascending Olympus, Prometheus stole a spark of sacred fire from Hephaestus's forge, where he crafted Zeus's thunderbolts. Hiding the smoldering reed in his hands, he descended to earth and gave fire to humans. From this moment, humanity began to prosper. Humans learned to cook food, heat their homes, forge tools and weapons. Fire became a symbol of progress and reason, but this gift came at a great cost for Prometheus. Zeus, upon learning of the theft, became enraged. He believed fire should belong only to the gods and viewed Prometheus's act as betrayal. As punishment, Zeus ordered Hephaestus to chain Prometheus to a rock on the summit of the Caucasus Mountains. There, every day, an eagle sent by Zeus would come and peck at Prometheus's liver, which would regenerate each night, condemning the Titan to eternal torment. Prometheus, however, did not repent, proudly enduring his suffering for the benefit of humankind. According to one version of the myth, Prometheus was not only the giver of fire but also the creator of humans. He sculpted the first humans from clay, breathing life into them with a divine breath gifted by Athena. His love for his creation made him humanity's protector, which only intensified Zeus's wrath. Prometheus also prophesied that one day, a son of a mortal woman and Zeus would overthrow him, just as Zeus had overthrown Cronus. This prophecy made Zeus regard Prometheus with even greater hatred. Prometheus remained chained to the rock for many centuries, until the hero Hercules, passing by during his labors, killed the eagle and freed the Titan, breaking his chains with a mighty blow. Zeus, respecting Hercules, allowed Prometheus to regain his freedom, but as a sign of eternal remembrance of his punishment, Prometheus had to wear an iron ring with a piece of the rock. The myth of Prometheus became a symbol of sacrifice, rebellion against injustice, and the pursuit of knowledge. Pandora, the first woman created by the gods, appeared in the world as part of humanity's punishment for Prometheus's deed. Zeus, enraged that humans had received fire, decided to take revenge by creating a being that would bring them suffering. He ordered Hephaestus to sculpt a beautiful woman from clay, resembling the goddesses. Athena taught her crafts and dressed her in magnificent robes. Aphrodite bestowed upon her beauty and charm, and Hermes instilled in her cunning and eloquence. She was named Pandora, meaning all gifted, and was sent to earth as a gift to Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother. Epimetheus, despite Prometheus's warning not to accept gifts from Zeus, was captivated by Pandora's beauty and married her. Zeus handed Pandora a sealed jar, in later versions a box, strictly forbidding her to open it. In this jar were confined all the world's woes, diseases, famine, wars, envy, hatred, and other misfortunes. Pandora, driven by curiosity, which Hermes had instilled in her soul, could not resist. One day, when Epimetheus was absent, she opened the lid of the jar, a crack, and all the woes burst forth, spreading throughout the world and bringing suffering to mankind. In terror, Pandora slammed the lid shut. But it was too late. Only hope remained trapped inside. According to one version of the myth, hope remained in the jar as a solace for humanity, giving them the strength to overcome hardship. According to another, more grim interpretation, hope was the last evil that Zeus kept, so that humans could not find comfort in it amidst their suffering. Pandora, realizing what she had done, wept and pleaded with the gods for forgiveness, but the world had already changed forever. Epimetheus, though he loved Pandora, could not protect her from Prometheus's wrath, who blamed his brother for accepting Zeus's gift. The story of Pandora became a symbol of human weakness and the consequences of curiosity, but also highlighted the complexity of human nature. Pandora was not a villain. She was an instrument of divine design, created to punish mankind for Prometheus's audacity. Her myth explained the origin of evil in the world, but also reminded of hope, which, even if it remained in the jar, continued to inspire humans to battle their woes. Greek mythology, with its tales of gods, heroes, and mortals, wove a rich tapestry of stories that have survived the ages and continue to inspire humankind. These myths, beginning with chaos and the birth of the first gods, Uranus, Gaia, and their children, the Titans, reveal not only the origin of the world but also profound truths about human nature. Zeus, who overthrew his father Cronus, became a symbol of order established through struggle. But his power, like that of other gods, was full of contradictions. Hera, Athena, Apollo, Aphrodite, and the other Olympians embodied forces of nature, passion, reason, and chaos, reminding humans of the complexity of the world they inhabited. Heroes like Hercules, Perseus, Theseus, Odysseus, and Aeneas, through their exploits, showed that even mortals could defy fate. Their stories are not just tales of bravery but also of flaws: the pride of Bellerophon, the greed of Midas, the curiosity of Pandora, and the tragic love of Orpheus for Eurydice. Each myth carried a lesson, whether a warning about the consequences of hubris, as in the case of Icarus, or a celebration of resilience, as in the journey of Aeneas, who laid the foundations of Rome. Even gods like Prometheus, who sacrificed himself for humanity, or Demeter, who mourned for Persephone, showed that even immortals were not immune to suffering and love. The myths also reflected the connection between humans and nature. Daphne, transformed into a laurel, Hyacinthus, who became a flower, and Adonis, whose blood gave life to anemones, reminded the Greeks that nature was alive and infused with divinity. The cult of Cybele and Attis, the Eleusinian mysteries of Demeter, and the Orphic rites underscored the cycles of death and rebirth, promising hope for renewal. These stories taught the Greeks to respect the earth, the sea, and the sky, which were embodied by Gaia, Poseidon, and Uranus. Greek myths were not mere fairy tales. They were the bedrock of culture, art, and philosophy. Poets like Homer and Hesiod captured the exploits of gods and heroes in the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Theogony, inspiring generations. The tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, telling the stories of Oedipus, Antigone, and Iphigenia, challenged audiences to ponder fate, duty, and morality. Sculptors and painters depicted scenes from the Trojan War, the Labors of Hercules, and the love of Psyche and Eros, creating masterpieces that still adorn museums today. The legacy of Greek mythology lives on. The names of gods and heroes echo in the names of stars and planets. Venus, Aphrodite, Mars, Ares, Jupiter, Zeus. The myths inspire literature, film, and art, reminding us of timeless themes: love, sacrifice, struggle, and the search for meaning. Prometheus, who gifted fire, became a symbol of rebellion for progress, and Odysseus, the embodiment of the yearning for home. Even the tragedy of Narcissus and Echo teaches us to avoid self-absorption and to cherish genuine affection. Ultimately, Greek myths are a mirror in which humanity sees its dreams and fears. They tell of how gods and mortals, despite their strengths and weaknesses, are bound by a common destiny. Zeus, reigning from Olympus, and Sisyphus, eternally rolling his boulder, remind us that life is a struggle, but there is always room for hope, much like the hope that remained in Pandora's jar. And as long as stars shine in the night sky, the stories of Hyacinthus, Pygmalion, Orion, and others will live on, inspiring new generations to seek beauty and meaning in this chaotic and beautiful world.